would bring you guys along here as long as we're doing this. My cousin yesterday was coming home from work and she was following this guy on Highway 51, and deer jumped out in front of the guy and the guy hit it, and she stopped to make sure he was okay, and he didn't want the deer, so she immediately called the sheriff's department, had it tagged, called me up, and we butchered it. Sure, we looked like a couple rednecks right there, but girl power got us about 87 pounds of ground. Well, because it's so hot still here, even though they are expecting rain today, because it's so hot here, we just put it through the grinder and just ground it up. So everything we got is ground venison. And so what I'm going to do, just to let you know, I make my own electricity. I make all all the energy that runs this farm comes off of either wind turbines or solar panels. And so I don't have a whole lot of spare energy. So I only have one freezer for the whole place. And so we're just going to can this, just because despite this being a nice windfall to have, a little extra food in the cellar, extra free food in the cellar, it kind of came at the wrong time because we're having a huge block party here, a huge neighborhood party here this Sunday, and so we've got a lot of stuff that needs to get done. Anyway, before then, so basically I'm just going to spend the day canning, and so what I'm doing first here is I brown the venison. Now, you don't always have to brown it. If you want, you can boil it. Right at this moment, they're up canning green beans, so they've got the other 3 pressure canners. So I've only got 1 pressure canner here. As soon as that's done, then we'll probably put the rest of it into a big pot and boil it. But I like the texture and the flavor of browned meat, canned brown meat, as opposed to canned boiled meat. Canned boiled meat gets a little mushy. So I have a tendency of liking it browned. So I'm browning this basically just until, because I can't do big batches of it, all I can do is 1 little batch right now, but once we get all the canners going, then we'll just boil it and get it going just so we can get it done with. I'm putting these in pints, pint jars. The reason I put mine in pints is because once this jar is sealed, you have something that will, as long as the jar is not compromised in any way, you will have a product that can stay on the shelf. But as soon as you open the jar, you have to find, if you don't eat it all, you have to find another way of storing it. And since I tend to not eat quarts of food at one time, this means once I open that quart, I have to find a different way of storing it, usually in the fridge. And fridges are only so big and can only hold so much, and so I try not to, I try to make Cannin in pints because I'm more likely to use up a pint of food in a day than I am to use up a quart of food in a day. There are certain things that I can in quarts. I can my tomato juices. If I'm making chunks of meat instead of ground meat, then I'll usually can those in a quart. And pie fillings, things like that, things that I'm going to dump all into one pie anyway, those I usually do into quarts. But for the most part, beans, corn, ground meat, a lot, you know, just a lot of the things that I can in pints just because I don't eat more than a pint. So I've got this browned up, and I've got everything heated. I've got my jars and lids and everything are heating back here. I put a splash of vinegar in there to keep the jars from getting the minerals from depositing on the jars. I've got my water here, and the pressure canner is just starting to heat up, and I've got a splash of vinegar in there to keep, again, for the same reason, to keep the jars from getting all cruddy. And then I've got some water in the back boiling so that I can put it into my jars. So I'm going to get started here, but I'm going to talk just a little bit. First of all, this is roadkill, and a lot of people, when they hear the word roadkill, they kind of get all like grossed out by this. And they're all like, "Oh, roadkill! That's disgusting. Why would you do that? Just have roadkill, eat roadkill." And my point is that a lot of life gets sacrificed, including, I think, our own health gets sacrificed for our needs for speed. We need to drive really fast and get to wherever we're going, and oh, we got to get there, we got to get there, we got to get there, and then as soon as we get there, we got to turn around and get somewhere else, and get somewhere else, and oh, geez, you know, we're always in a hurry. And I don't think that's good for us. I don't think it's good for us, and it's definitely not good for the environment or for the animals around us. And so I want to leave about an inch or so of headspace, and I also want it kind of packed down in there. I mean, I'm not going to really just jam it down in there, but I want it pretty firm in there. So, a lot of animals have a tendency, I'm going to do a couple at a time here, so that's yours. I may even do 3 at a time so I can get my last 3 jars into the hot water bath. So, like I said, a lot of animals sacrifice themselves to our need for speed. And it's a world that we created. I think it's a pretty false world. I don't think we need to always be in this big of a hurry. I think it's kind of something that we've been brainwashed into believing that we need to be in this big a hurry, because if we're in this big a hurry, we can be making somebody else money. So, you know, I don't think we always need to be in that big of a hurry, but we are, and animals die because of it. Now, we can just leave them lying there on the side of the road. Couple problems that are going to happen from that in this country, and that is it's going to draw predators and scavengers. And first of all, it's going to put those scavengers on the side of the road where they can get hit and do more damage, maybe kill somebody. Maybe kill somebody, or obviously they would get killed. But it also brings those scavengers and predators into where people are. And when scavengers come to around people, they start getting used to us, predators, and then eventually they can become dangerous, and the rangers come in and shoot them. So it's just for everybody's sake, including the animals' sake, it's always best to try to keep them, to keep people and wild, especially predators, a little separate. So leaving an animal on the side of the road, a dead animal on the side of the road, can bring that in. And then there's just the fact that these animals died for our need for speed. And to me, it seems a little disrespectful just to hit them and then just leave them lie. It's like, whatever, just whatever. I feel bad, but I'm on my way. So for me, there's an honor in the consumption, the thankfulness that I have something to eat, and the fact that I can feed the people that I care about, and there's a thankfulness in it. I thank the animals that give their lives so I can eat, but we should also thank the animals that give their lives, and the plants as well, because plants are just as sacred of beings as animals are. But we should give thanks to the plants as well, and to the animals who die for us to live the life that we've chosen to live. And one of the things that we've chosen to live with is to drive really fast. Okay, so now I'm just going to put a little bit, I got some boiling water over here, and I'm just going to cover all of this with boiling water. Doesn't take too much, but we just let it perk down in there. And again, I still want to maintain, I just want it covered. So I want to maintain as much of a top as, my inch headspace as possible. Oops, sorry sweeties, I know, I'm out here canning. And so for me, taking an animal off the side of the road and consuming it is an act of respect for that animal, instead of just kind of shrugging and going and saying, well, it's dead, nothing I can do about it, it jumped out in front of me, I killed it, that's the way it is. Instead, I take it and I put its flesh to use, and I also get it off the side of the road for so that other animals aren't attracted to the side of the road. So anyway, that's my take on roadkill. Everybody's got a different take on it. That's my take. That there's a respect in consuming the animal instead of just leaving it lie there, we acknowledge the sacrifice it made through the consumption of it. So, is it gross? I don't think so, but then I like to eat, and I also like to know where my food comes from. So that's why we do it. If somebody's going to hit a deer and do damage to their car, and they're not going to go and take the carcass, I'm going to take the carcass. And I'm going to butcher it up and eat it. And I've been butchering since I was a kid, you know, help Dad and Mom do it. And so it's just something that, it's free food, so basically, for us. And it's also kind of, like I said, an honor that, because I've chosen this kind of life, which needs an automobile, that these animals have sacrificed themselves for this life, and so the consumption of that animal makes me feel like I've done something a little bit more worthwhile than just killed it and left it lie. So then, so venison is an excellent meat to eat. It's very good for you. It's low in sugars. So it's low in fat, it's low in sugar, and it's been shown to help alleviate diabetes. So, one second. Because its sugars are easily digestible and it doesn't have much of the sugars, it's going to be not as sweet of a meat, but it's going to be easier for your body to digest it than it would be for like the domesticated meats. Those are bred for their flavor, while of course venison is bred for how fast it can run. So it's still got the wild flavor, and it's been shown scientifically that if people relied on a more natural, wild diet, including their meats, there would be less diabetes, less hardening of the arteries, and less plaque buildup in the arteries, which of course can lead to heart attacks and strokes. So wild meat is always good food, and it's very good for dogs, for cats. Again, low-fat meat. It's good. It's better to feed your dog this than it is to give them that horrible kibble crap that's in the little bags that most people feed their dogs. I mean, that stuff is like chicken beaks and everything ground up and then dehydrated, and then we feed it to our dogs and wonder why our dogs are all gone by the time they're 10 years old. Dogs used to live a lot longer now. But venison is just a good meat. Any of your wild meats, bison, rabbit, any of these are good meats. Of course, rabbits are so low in fat that sometimes you have to make up for that fat elsewhere. But it's still good for you meat. It's easier for your body to digest if you add a fat source, like have some bread and butter with it. That's good enough. Or have, cook your rabbit with a little bit of bacon around it. That'll be your fat source. Let's see. What else is I going to talk about? I guess canning was the other thing I was going to kind of talk about here. And the reason I thought I'd talk about this is because sometimes I see people using canning for the wrong reason. Canning, pressure canning, water bath canning, all of these things are great skills to have. And the reason they're great skills is because they help you preserve your food. If you raise your own food, if you harvest, if you butcher, if you hunt, fish, forage, all of these things, you can preserve your food. It's one of the better long-term storage ways of long-term storage preservation, because once this gets sealed, once we get a jar that's sealed, as long as that jar is not compromised, that food is still good. Food will be good 100 years from now. It may not have the same color and texture that it would have when it was first canned, but it is still amazingly, it's still food. You can still eat it. there really isn't an end date to canned food as long as the jar is not compromised in any way. And rust on the lid would be a compromise. The seal being broken is an obvious compromise. Crack in the jar, again, a compromise. But as long as it's not compromised, you got long-term food storage. And it's an already prepared food storage. This will be cooked and everything. So say there's an emergency or a power outage, which we don't get because I make my own electricity, but say that there's I don't have as much energy as I'd like to have. This is already cooked, it's been treated, not treated, but sterilized, that's what I'm looking at, and sealed so that it's perfectly safe to consume basically straight out of the can, even if you couldn't heat this up. But even, you know, if you're normal and you wanted to heat it up, that's all you got to do is heat and eat. It's all ready to go. It's already cooked, so you could throw this in with into a quart of stewed tomatoes, and, you know, chop up some onions, and, you know, in a half an hour you'd have a meal. Instead of having to brown the meat and everything already, you'd be all set and ready to go. So it's a great way of preserving. It's a great way of being in charge of your own food destiny, as I like to call it. If you've ever, being that I live in farm country, I worked in many food processing plants. And I'm talking canning factories. I worked for Del Monte, I worked for Green Giant, and I worked for Stokely. And Stokely's like a clearinghouse for everybody. And not everybody, but for a bunch of different ones anyway. And if you ever work in a food processing plant, I can guarantee you that you will not want to be part of the food grid. You won't want to be buying your food from a store. People who process your food are usually people who are paid very little, and if they're illegal aliens, or illegal immigrants, they're probably paid even less. They don't give a flying rat's butt about you, because obviously you don't care about them because you're not paying them very much. You want your food for so cheap. And so they can do disgusting things to your food supply. People may not realize this, but there is an acceptable level of human urine, feces, and saliva that is allowed to be in your food. And believe me, probably if you're buying canned goods, you're getting the acceptable level of human feces, somebody else's feces, in your canned goods. And I've seen it, and it's not I've worked in canning factories, and it's, like I said, I don't want to be part of the food grid as much as possible. So, you know, canning, again, great way of being in control of your own food. It's a way of preserving, so we don't live in this feast and famine kind of thing, where basically, you know, you get a dead deer and you eat and eat and eat and eat until it starts to decay, and then you till it starts to decay, and then of course now you don't have anything to eat. Human beings learned a long time ago that by preserving their food, they can keep their food intake at a more acceptable, normal level, instead of going a lot at one time and none, and then a lot and none, and basically keeps them from starving to death. The negatives of canning. A lot of times you'll see people who are like, I buy meat and can it. I buy meat really cheap and then I can it, or I buy vegetables really cheap and then I can them. And this is my way of saving money. Canning probably will never let you save money. In fact, canning, because of how energy intensive it is, it takes a lot of energy to can, will probably end up costing you more money in the long run, unless you grow your own food, you know, butcher, harvest, hunt, forage, fish, things like that. Canning will probably be more expensive than just buying it already canned. And the main reason for that is, if you look at my stove, I have 4 burners going. I've got the one that's used to heat the meat up. I've got the one that's used to keep the jars warm. I've got the one that's getting the pressure canner ready. And I've got the one keeping the water boiling that I'm putting into the jars here. So it becomes pretty obvious pretty fast that this is not a cheap way of doing it. Gas actually costs more than, I'm running it on the electric stove, but what that means for me is it means I can't be washing clothes or dishes. I have to really watch where my energy is going right now, because I'm using all 4 burners on an electric stove. And because I make my own electricity, then that means I have to cut back somewhere else, or else I have to go out and buy more solar panels, more wind turbines, and more batteries, all of which are things I don't want to do. So I just watch what I'm doing. I don't do laundry at the same time I'm canning. It's just the way it is. It's not that big of a deal to me, but for some people it might be. So anyway, canning, because of the amount of energy it uses, I guess we'll use this one, because of the amount of energy that canning uses to preserve your food, it doesn't make your food cheaper. In fact, it makes your food pretty damn expensive. I'm probably paying as much for this venison that I butchered as you do for if you went down and bought meat and put it in the freezer. It's not a way of getting by cheaply. It's a way of being in control of your own food. That's what it is. It's a way of maintaining your control over your food so that you know what's gone into it and what you have, you know, what you're going to get out of it. Okay, so I've got these. I'll bring you around here. So what I'm saying is if you're doing your canning to save money, you're kind of fooling yourself. That doesn't happen. Canning actually, because if I didn't make my own electricity, I would be paying for this electricity to can this meat. And it's going to take 75 minutes to can these pints. 75 minutes of boiling, pressure canning this. And it's going to take a good 20 minutes or so just to get us up to that 75 minutes. So it's going to be well over 2 hours of electricity that I'm going to be using just for the canner. And that's not talking about heating the water up back here, heating the jars up, heating the meat up. You know, that's just talking about the canning. And that's a lot of money that goes in. That's a lot of energy, and that's a lot of money if you're paying for it. So canning is not a way to get by cheaply. But it is a way of being in control of your own food system. A lot of times, here's some meat that I did just a little bit ago. A lot of times your meat, you can't find jars of meat. You can't buy canned meat very much anymore. So you can get yourself some meat set aside. You know, it's long-term storage, and it's your food. You know where it came from. You know where it's going to. So I'm going to get this heating up here and get this covered up, and I'll show you. Basically, we're going to put the cover on it, and we're going to start blowing out the air out of this, and I got to get the cover on to do that. So I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so what we've done is we've started we've locked the lid down. Basically, there's these 2 V's, and the other V is underneath this thing right now, but you line up to the 2 V's, push them down, and turn it so that the lid is locked on. So now the lid's locked on. This is a more modern day canner. So it's really hard to screw this up. I've met a lot of people who are like, I'd love to pressure can, but I'm really scared to do it. Well, it's really hard to screw these things up. And I didn't show you this, but what you do is you hold this up to the light before you put the lid on and make sure that this hole is not plugged. And basically from then on, because of the design of the canner, you can't screw it up. What's going to happen is as we start letting off steam, and I've got this water a little high in here because it is going to be boiled for 75 minutes for the meat, so I've got it a little on the high side so that I don't boil it off, so my canner doesn't go dry. That's your main thing that you got to worry about, is make sure you have enough water in there so that your canner doesn't go dry. But eventually what's going to happen is this here is a safety valve, safety button. It's going to pop up. And as soon as that does, it's going to lock this lid on. And there's nothing you can do. That means the pressure has started. Oh. And once that does, once we get that going, once that pops up, then we time 10 minutes. And that is to blow all the air out of there. If we leave air in the canner, it's going to decrease the pressure. It's not going to allow the pressure to build up, and that's what we want. We're going to want 10 pounds of pressure on here. And so Once this comes up, we give it 10 minutes so it can blow out all the air. And then we put our rocker on. And I use the rocker. Here's the thing, the only reason you need a gauge is if you live in the mountains. If you live in the mountains, if you live high above sea level, you're going to need a gauge, and then you're going to have to go through all the rigmarole of finding out what your sea level is. You're going to have to check your pressure on the day that you're going to be canning, and you're going to have to readjust every time. Okay, it's a pain to can in the mountains, but hey, you get to live in the mountains, so hey, maybe that's better. You know, yay, you live in the mountains, so you get all that pretty view and everything. So I think we can adjust for the canning. For those of us who live closer to the sea level, here in Wisconsin, we live pretty close. This is using the weighted, the weights instead of a gauge is not only what we do, it's better. We don't have to worry about calibrating this. We know that as long as I have one ring here, and let me put this down so I can show you. That's 5 pounds. See, what's happening is we pressurize, the steam can only escape out of this little hole. And when we put this covering that little hole, we get 5 pounds of pressure. It holds down enough steam in there that it will build up to 5 pounds of pressure. It doesn't mean these things weigh 10 pounds. Obviously, I'm, juggling this here. Then when you put the extra weight on, now this is 10 pounds of pressure. And just that little extra weight keeps that much more steam in there, in here, through this hole, right there, that now 10 pounds of pressure on. And it's so easy to do. If you live, around sea level, or even, just a little bit above sea level, don't worry about getting the gauge. That just makes everything so much more difficult. I don't understand why people do it. These are so much easier to work with, the weights. Of course, if you live in the mountains, like I said, you trade for that beautiful view that you get. You have to trade for, you have to have the gauge instead of the weights. It's the only reason why you ever need a gauge, is if you live in the mountains. You can start seeing, you can start seeing the steam is starting to come out. We're building up pressure here. We're getting, well, actually right at this moment, we're just blowing the air out. And because it's a little high, we're getting a little spitting going on. But eventually this thing's going to pop up. Once that pops up, then we start the 10-minute time. So I'm going to wait for that to pop up, and I'll show you that. Okay, now the pressure in the can has popped the safety valve up. Now we've got that up. Actually, instead of talking to you, I'll get this going. 1 second. Let me get my timer started. So I just started the timer for the for this. We want to go 10 minutes now to blow out all the air. So we've had our 10 minutes, and basically then we just do the, quickly put the rocker on. Now we got to wait for that to get a good rock going. Just, when it first starts, it'll kind of rock a little bit and then rock again. You want a good rock to start going on it before you start doing the timing, because that means that all the air is out of there, the pressure is built up to that 10 pounds, and you can start the timing. Okay, so you can see we've got a good rock going. So we're going to start our timing now, and I'm going to put it on for 75 minutes. See if I can figure out what. And because these are pints at 75 minutes, if they were quarts, it would be an hour and a half. It'd be 90 minutes. But because I'm doing pints, it's 75 minutes, and we'll get that started. And we're off. And when that goes off in a little bit, then we'll be ready to go from here. Okay, we're just about done here. I'm going to break it down to the last second there. Okay, and then we just turn this off. I just turn the heat off. Now it's going to take a little while, especially since this is on an electric stove top, so it's going to take a little bit for that to cool down. And then once that cools down, it'll take a little bit for the pressure to slowly release. I can't do anything with this now until that button drops. So I just turn it off and I walk away. And in about half an hour or so, this little button is going to drop because the pressure will have released itself. And then it'll be time to open it up and get that batch out and get the new batch started. But anyway, that's where we are right now. I'll keep popping in and checking on this, and as soon as that button drops down, it'll be time to open it, to remove the rocker and open it. Okay, so the you can see now that the button here, the safety valve here has dropped, and so that has unlocked the cover here. I can take the cover off, and so I'm going to do that, but it takes two hands so you don't burn yourself, because when you take off a cover, and I could put you guys back onto your tripod and show you, but when you take off a cover, first you remove, and we can do that right now. We remove the rocker so we don't lose that. But the other thing we do is you turn it, when you lift it up, you lift it so it faces away from you, because it's going to release a lot of steam, and you certainly don't want that steam coming towards your face. So we have to unlock it. And that I can do one-handed, but now I'm going to have to use both hands to lift it up and have it so it's away from me. So I'll be back in just a second, but and then we'll look inside and see what we got in there, see what's been happening inside the pressure canner here. So back in a bit. Oh, then I steamed you up just as I pushed the button. So let's see if we can unsteam you here. Come on, unsteam. Okay. Now, if anybody remembers, there was probably, when we got started here, the water was way high, almost covering, almost up to the rims of these jars. And now, that water is boiled way down. That's the pressure, that's the steam releasing. You always want it, the longer your cooking time is, the more water you're going to want to have in there. Even if the manufacturer says put an inch down at the bottom or 2 inches down at the bottom, if you're going to have a long cooking time like for meat, I suggest putting a little bit more water in there. In fact, almost to the point that you've got it in a, well, what am I looking for here? A water bath instead of a pressure canner. So we're going to take these out, and you can see, I'm going to put you guys over here. No, I guess I won't do that, but you can see that's still boiling. That's because it was hotter than boiling inside that pressure canner. It was hotter than 212 degrees. That was needed to kill off anything like salmonella or worse, botulism. So inside these things, it is still boiling. I'm just going to, you want to be kind of careful because everything's a little more fragile right now. And I'm a klutz, so that's why I'm trying to be careful here. But when I get going really fast, then all of a sudden I smack it against something. And you're going to want to set it on a towel. Don't set it directly on the counter. The main reason is because your counter's cold and your jars are hot. And when those two things come together, they can crack the jars. When you get cold and hot coming together. But you can just see here, just a bubbling away. And that is just, it's going to take a little bit for that to cool down. Okay, there you go. We've got it. We've got them. They're going to be cooling down here. As they cool, they should seal. And I'm going to show you here. This is one that I did already. You're going to, of course, want to write what it is and date it. There's a little button on top, and I definitely can't push this because, again, it's hotter than boiling. The top of that lid is. But you can kind of see it sticks out. And after it seals, it'll just literally suck all the air out of it and pull that down, and it'll create a vacuum. And so you should be able to push the middle of all the jars and not have them pop. We're going to leave these rings on for about 24 hours, and then the rings will come off. If you end up, I mean, don't sit here and chastise yourself if you accidentally leave them on for a week. I've done that many times. Like, whatever I'm done canning today, it'll go on the shelves, and the next thing I can, I'll go down there and be like, oh, I forgot to take the rings off. Or the next thing I can, I'll be like, I don't have enough rings, and then I'll go down and take them off. Try to get them off before they've been sitting down there for too long, because they can rust on there, and once they start rusting, rust is of course a life form, and it will eat away. Oh, pop! Did you hear that? That popping noise? That was one of the jars sealing. It will start eating away at. I'm pet sitting my neighbor's dogs here, and I've got all their medication back here, but all of the dogs are just playing and going crazy. But anyway, that's what you want, is you do not want any give on these jar lids. And then, like I said, you'll take this off, and the lids, just because you don't want the rust to go, because once it starts rusting, it'll eat through this top. Oh, another one popped. Another one popped. It'll eat through the top, and then, of course, your jars are compromised, and you have to throw the food away. We've already had a few seal. You heard them popping. And this one here has not yet popped. Oh, that one just popped. This is the one that hasn't popped yet. Have they all the rest of them popped? No, that one hasn't. Oh, there we go. That's me canning venison, and now I gotta get going here and get the rest of it canned. So at some point tonight, I might be able to take a nap. See y'all.